The coffee tasted bitter, but there was something oddly comforting about it. Tess sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the steaming cup as though it might blink first. The clock on the wall read 3:17 a.m., but she wasn't tired. Sleep had been a distant concept for weeks now, ever since she started hearing the whispers in her apartment. They weren't loud, just faint murmurs that danced on the edge of perception, like a radio station caught between frequencies. At first, she thought it was the neighbors, but the walls here were concrete, thick enough to muffle even her own thoughts sometimes. Then she considered the pipes, but they weren't consistent enough for that either. The whispers came when they wanted to, as though they were testing her. Tonight, though, the whispers weren't playing coy. They were louder, insistent, and coming from one place: the closet. Tess set her coffee down, the mug clinking softly against the bedside table. She told herself it was nothing, just her overworked brain conjuring stories out of boredom. She worked from home now, spending her days staring at a screen filled with numbers and spreadsheets. It was lonely work, the kind that made every creak and groan in the apartment seem amplified. But the closet, that was new. She stood slowly, her socks muffling her steps on the hardwood floor. The door to the closet was cracked open, just enough to reveal a sliver of darkness. She thought she closed it earlier, but then again, maybe she hadn't. Her memory wasn't exactly reliable these days. "Tess," the whisper came, soft and deliberate. She froze. The sound was unmistakable this time. Her name, spoken clearly, but with an inflection she couldn't place. It wasn't human, not exactly. It carried a texture, like a layer of static beneath the syllables. "Tess," it repeated, drawing the word out like a slow breath. "We've been waiting." Her heart hammered in her chest, but curiosity outweighed fear. She inched closer to the door, her breath shallow. Her hand hesitated on the doorknob, her mind racing with worst-case scenarios. Burglars, pranksters, some bizarre echo of her own subconscious. None of them felt right. The door opened with a low creak, revealing a closet that looked just as it should. Clothes hung neatly on their hangers, shoes lined up in pairs on the floor. But something was wrong. The darkness inside the closet was alive. It rippled, as though the shadows were liquid. And there, in the center, was a faint light. A pinprick of glowing silver that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. "Step through," the whisper urged, clearer now. It wasn't coming from the closet itself, but from within her own head, resonating like a thought she hadn't quite thought yet. Tess wanted to slam the door and run, but her feet carried her forward instead. She reached out a trembling hand, her fingertips grazing the edge of the glowing light. The world tilted, and suddenly, she wasn't standing in her apartment anymore. She was falling. The sensation was disorienting, like tumbling through warm water. Except there was no resistance, no sound, just an endless rush of movement. Colors swirled around her. Vivid blues and golds and greens, streaked with something darker, something like ink. She couldn't tell how long she fell, only that when she landed, it was soft, like stepping into a dream. She was standing in a forest, but not one she recognized. The trees were impossibly tall, their leaves glowing faintly with a bioluminescent light. The ground beneath her feet was soft and mossy, and the air smelled of rain and something sweeter, like honey. Above her, the sky wasn't black or blue but a deep, shimmering purple, speckled with stars that moved, rearranging themselves in patterns she couldn't understand. "Welcome," the voice said, but now it had a body. Tess turned to see a figure standing at the edge of the clearing. It was humanoid but not human. Its skin was translucent, shifting with colors like the surface of an oil slick. Its eyes were orbs of pure light, too bright to look at directly, and its hands, if they were hands, hovered inches away from its body, trailing wisps of mist. "What is this place?" Tess asked, her voice unsteady. "Who are you?" "This is the Between," the figure replied, its voice a perfect harmony of male and female tones. "And I am what you made me." Tess frowned. "What I made you? I've never seen you before." "Not with your eyes," it said, stepping closer. Its presence radiated warmth and something else, an almost magnetic pull. "But your thoughts?" Your dreams? They've shaped me. She took a step back, her mind racing. This had to be a hallucination, a fever dream brought on by too much caffeine and too little sleep. But everything here felt too real. The texture of the moss under her feet, the hum of the air around her. Why am I here? She asked. What do you want from me? You are here because you are unmoored, the figure said. Untethered from the threads that anchor others to their world. It is rare, this state of being, but it makes you valuable. Valuable for what? To us, it replied simply, as though that answered everything. It reached out a hand, or something like a hand, and touched her forehead lightly. Tess felt a rush of images, places she'd never been, people she'd never met, emotions she couldn't name. It was overwhelming, like drowning in memories that didn't belong to her. Stop, she gasped, pulling away. The figure tilted its head, watching her with an expression she couldn't read. You are not ready, it said, its voice tinged with something like regret. But you will be. Before she could ask what that meant, the ground beneath her feet shifted. The forest dissolved into a whirl of light and color, and she was falling again, faster this time. When she opened her eyes, she was back in her apartment. The clock on the wall read 3:18 a.m., and the coffee on her bedside table was still steaming. But the whispers were gone, and the closet door was closed. For now. The night I found the tiny bird, I had no idea it would lead to the most intense argument of my life. I didn't even know what kind of bird it was, just that it was trembling, soaked to the bone from the rain, and huddled in the corner of our porch like it had given up on the world. Its feathers were a pale, dusty gray, speckled with streaks of white and gold, like someone had painted it with half a brushstroke. I named it Finch, mostly because it felt right, even if I wasn't sure that's what it was. I brought Finch inside, cradled in a dish towel, and set it in a shoebox lined with tissues. My girlfriend, Clara, stood behind me with her arms crossed. You sure about this? She asked, raising an eyebrow. It's just for tonight, I said. I'll take it to the wildlife center in the morning. Right? Clara said. But her tone carried a weight I didn't fully understand until much later. The next morning, the wildlife center gave me a lecture. Apparently, they were overwhelmed with rescues, and birds like Finch didn't always get priority. The man behind the counter, an older guy with a permanent scowl, glanced at the shoebox and shrugged. Best you can do is keep it warm, feed it, and see what happens. Birds are tricky. Sometimes they just don't make it. That was the start of everything. Finch became my little project. I Googled everything I could about caring for injured birds. I built a makeshift enclosure in the corner of the living room, a mix of perches and cloth-lined boxes. Clara tolerated it at first, but I could see the tension in her jaw every time she walked past. It's not sustainable, she said one evening, as I tried coaxing Finch into eating some mushy concoction of seeds and softened bread. You can't just play wildlife rehabber indefinitely. He needs me, I replied, glancing at Finch, who cocked his head as if he understood. And it's not indefinitely, just until he's strong enough to fly. Clara sighed but didn't push it. Not yet. Weeks turned into months. Finch grew stronger, his feathers sleek and shiny now, his tiny eyes bright with intelligence. But his wing, the one that had been bent at that odd angle when I found him, didn't heal quite right. Every time I tried to coax him to fly, he'd flutter awkwardly to the ground, chirping in what sounded like frustration. This isn't working, Clara said one night, her voice heavy with exhaustion. He's not getting better. He's not going to fly. Alex, he's not meant to stay like this. I looked at her, my hands tightening around the edges of the shoebox I still used to move Finch around. What's that supposed to mean? It means, she said slowly, like she was trying to pull a splinter out of my brain, that maybe keeping him alive like this isn't kindness. Maybe it's cruelty. The words hit me like a slap. Cruelty? I echoed, my voice rising. You think helping him survive is cruel? She ran a hand through her hair, pacing the room. He's not surviving, Alex. He's trapped. He's a wild animal stuck in a living room. He can't do what he's meant to do, and you're keeping him here because you can't let go. That's not fair. I shot back, my voice shaking. I'm trying to give him a life. I'm trying to give him a chance. A chance to what? She snapped. Sit in a box for the rest of his life while you pretend this is normal? We didn't speak for the rest of the night. Finch, oblivious to the tension, chirped softly from his perch, as if trying to mediate. I stayed up late, scrolling through forums and articles, trying to find success stories, anything to prove Clara wrong. But the more I read, the more the doubts crept in. Finch wasn't thriving. He wasn't flying. He wasn't happy. The next morning, I woke to find Clara sitting by Finch's enclosure, her hand resting on the edge of the perch. She looked tired, but her voice was calm when she spoke. I'm not saying you don't love him, she said. I know you do. But love isn't about holding on just because you can't imagine letting go. I sat down across from her, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. What are you suggesting? That we put him down? No, she said firmly. But maybe we let someone else decide. Someone who knows what's best for him. The idea of giving Finch up felt like a knife to the gut, but deep down, I knew she wasn't wrong. I called a wildlife rehabber the next day, a woman named Gwen who had been rescuing birds for over 20 years. When I brought Finch to her sanctuary, she greeted me with a warm smile and a quick but thorough examination of him. He's a fighter, Gwen said, stroking Finch's head gently, but that wing isn't going to get him back in the sky. He'll need special care. Can you give him that? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She nodded. We have a space for birds like him. He'll have company, safety, and all the care he needs. I handed Finch over with shaking hands, and for a moment, I thought I might crumble. But then Gwen placed him in a spacious aviary where 2 other small birds hopped and chirped around him. Finch seemed hesitant at first, but then he flapped his wings, a tiny, awkward flutter, and hopped closer to the others. On the drive home, Clara reached over and squeezed my hand. You did the right thing, she said softly. I don't know, I replied, staring out the window. Did I do it for him? Or for us? She didn't answer, and I'm still not sure. Finch is safe, I know that. But part of me wonders if I gave up too soon, if I should have fought harder. So, AITA? My neighbor, Angie, was the kind of person who could sell snow to a polar bear. When I moved into my duplex, she greeted me with a plate of chocolate chip cookies and a smile so radiant it felt like she'd been waiting her whole life just to welcome me. I liked her immediately, even if she seemed a bit intense. Angie wasn't just friendly, she was magnetic. The type of person who could charm her way into the lives of everyone she met. At first, having Angie as a neighbor was amazing. She knew everyone on the block, through casual wine nights that became mini block parties, and always seemed to have a clever fix for any problem. Car won't start? Angie's brother knows a guy. Need a babysitter? Angie's niece is great with kids. It felt like she was an unofficial mayor of the street, and I felt lucky to be in her good graces. But as the months wore on, I realized Angie's warmth came with strings. She had a knack for sliding her needs into casual conversations, weaving them so seamlessly into your day that by the time you realized you'd committed to something, she was already halfway to the next thing. It started small. She'd knock on my door asking to borrow my tools, just for a quick fix. Then she'd text me to grab her packages when she wasn't home. Soon, it was driving her dog, Miso, to the vet just this once, because she had a last-minute work call. I didn't mind, not at first. She was my neighbor, and it felt nice to help. But Angie had a way of escalating things. One Sunday morning, I woke up to find her in my backyard, stringing up fairy lights. I'm hosting a little brunch, she said brightly, as though she wasn't trespassing. Your yard gets better light in the morning. Hope that's okay. It wasn't. I spent the day awkwardly avoiding eye contact with a dozen strangers clinking mimosas under my pergola. When they finally left, Angie patted my arm and said, "You're such a lifesaver. I'll return the favor someday." She never did. The final straw came on a Wednesday evening. I was curled up on my couch, enjoying a rare moment of peace after a brutal day at work, when Angie knocked. I almost didn't answer, but her knocks turned into a frantic pounding, so I sighed, opened the door, and found her standing there with Miso on a leash and a panicked expression. "Can you watch Miso for a few hours?" she asked breathlessly. "It's an emergency." Before I could respond, She thrust the leash into my hand and bolted. No explanation. No timeline. Just me and a very confused golden retriever blinking at each other in the doorway. I spent the next 6 hours trying to reach her. She didn't answer her phone or reply to texts. By the time she finally came back, long past midnight, I was livid. "Angie, what the hell?" I demanded as she stumbled in, smelling like cheap vodka and regret. "Oh, come on," she slurred. "You're great with miso. I knew you'd handle it. Don't be mad." "Don't be mad?" I repeated, incredulous. "You said it was an emergency. You dumped your dog on me without even asking if I was available." She waved a hand dismissively. "It's not a big deal. You didn't have plans, right?" That was the moment something inside me snapped. "Angie, this isn't okay," I said, my voice shaking. "You can't keep doing this, treating me like your personal assistant. I've been helping you out for months, but you've crossed so many lines, and I'm done." Her face fell. For a second, I thought she might apologize, but then her eyes narrowed. "Wow," she said, her tone icy. "I didn't realize you were keeping score. I thought we were friends." "Friends don't take advantage of each other," I shot back. Her jaw tightened. "You're making this way bigger than it needs to be. I've done plenty for you too, like when I introduced you to the block, or helped you set up your Wi-Fi. You act like I owe you something. Newsflash. Neighbors help each other. That's what community is." I stared at her, stunned by the audacity of her response. She didn't see it. She truly didn't see how one-sided this friendship had been. She grabbed Miso's leash and stormed out, muttering something about how I wasn't who she thought I was. The fallout was swift. Angie stopped inviting me to her wine nights and brunches. Mutual neighbors started giving me funny looks, clearly privy to whatever version of the story she'd spun. I heard whispers about how I was cold and ungrateful, which only made me question myself more. But as lonely as it felt at first, I couldn't deny the relief of finally drawing a line. No more impromptu dog-sitting. No more backyard brunches. No more walking on eggshells around someone who treated my boundaries like speed bumps. Still, I can't help but wonder, was I too harsh? Should I have handled things differently? AITA? When Bailey suggested we start a podcast, I thought she was joking. We were sitting on her balcony, sipping cheap rose, and watching a pigeon with a mangled wing hop between 2 trash bins. The sun was setting, and the sky was streaked with the kind of colors that make you believe, briefly, that life is art. She turned to me, wide-eyed, and said, "We could be huge." Bailey always said things like that, and I always fell for it. This time was no different. By the time the stars came out, we'd already settled on a name, Unfiltered and Untamed. Bailey thought it sounded edgy. I thought it sounded like a cheap energy drink. "Exactly," she said. "It's ironic. People love ironic." We didn't have a theme, not really. The idea was that we'd talk about anything. Pop culture, weird childhood stories, existential crises, all filtered through our unique dynamic. Bailey described it as a mix of chaos and heart. I described it as 2 people who probably shouldn't have microphones. Either way, we were excited. We spent the next week designing a logo, mostly Bailey, testing microphones, mostly me, and arguing about whether to buy soundproofing panels. "We'll use blankets," she insisted. Our first episode was a disaster. We were supposed to discuss guilty pleasures, but Bailey spent 10 minutes trying to convince me that liking pineapple on pizza wasn't a personality trait. I retaliated by calling her a basic Spotify algorithm in human form. The rest of the episode devolved into laughter, awkward silences, and the sound of me spilling water directly into my lap. When I listened back, I cringed so hard my neck hurt. Bailey, however, thought it was brilliant. "We're relatable," she said, slapping the table for emphasis. "People love relatable." The second episode went better. By the third, we'd gained a small but devoted audience. "You guys are so real," one comment read. Another said, "Listening to this is like hanging out with my 2 favorite chaos goblins." I had no idea if that was a compliment, but Bailey printed it out and taped it to the fridge. For a while, it was good. Better than good, even. Bailey and I had been friends for years, but working on the podcast gave us a reason to talk about things we'd never talked about before. Her fear of dying alone, my fear of trying too hard and failing anyway. It felt like we were untangling each other's knots, one episode at a time. But then came the sponsorship deal. A niche brand of luxury headphones offered to pay us to mention their product in an episode. It wasn't much, just a few $100 and a free pair of headphones. But it was the first time we'd made real money from something we created. I was thrilled. Bailey was less so. "It feels gross," she said, tossing the contract onto the couch. "Like we're selling out." "We're not selling out," I argued. "We're buying in." "Buying into what?" she snapped. "A cycle of capitalism that exploits authenticity for profit?" I stared at her. "It's headphones, Bailey. They're not asking us to sell our souls." She sighed. "But eventually," she agreed. The tension, though, never really went away. It lurked in the background, sharp as a paper cut. Suddenly, every decision felt like a negotiation. Bailey wanted to keep the podcast raw and unscripted, while I thought we needed structure. She thought we should stick to weird, niche topics. I wanted to branch out. The arguments were small at first, the kind you could laugh off. But they grew sharper, more cutting. "You always interrupt me," Bailey said during one recording, after I jumped in to clarify a point. "It's called a conversation," I shot back. "Maybe try having one instead of monologuing." Her smile froze. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize I was the problem." The worst part was, we were still recording. That episode ended with an abrupt cut and 10 minutes of dead air. Things got worse when we tried a live episode. It was Bailey's idea, a way to connect with our listeners in real time. But halfway through, she made a snide comment about how I was obsessed with analytics. I laughed it off, but my stomach churned. Later, when someone in the chat asked how we kept our friendship strong while working together, I couldn't stop myself. "We don't," I said. The chat exploded with nervous laughter emojis, but Bailey's face hardened like drying cement. After the live episode, we didn't speak for a week. I thought she'd apologize. She thought I should. Neither of us budged. When we finally sat down to record again, the energy was off. Our banter felt forced, like actors trying to recapture the chemistry of a show that had gone on too long. The audience noticed. "You guys okay?" someone commented. "This feels tense." Bailey texted me a screenshot of the comment with a single message. "Fix this." I didn't reply. The final straw came during what would be our last episode. We were supposed to discuss unpopular opinions, but it quickly devolved into a passive-aggressive slugfest. Bailey claimed I was too controlling, while I accused her of not taking anything seriously. At one point, she said, "Maybe you should just do the podcast alone since you think you're so much better at it." "Maybe I will," I shot back. The silence that followed was deafening. I hit stop on the recorder, grabbed my coat, and left. The episode never aired. A week later, Bailey announced on social media that Unfiltered and Untamed was on hiatus. I unfollowed her that same day. Now, months later, I sometimes catch myself scrolling through old episodes, listening to the laughter that once came so easily. I don't know if I missed the podcast or the version of us that made it. Maybe both. A few days ago, I got a package in the mail, no return address, just my name in Bailey's loopy handwriting. Inside was a single pair of mismatched socks, one orange, one purple, each with a note attached. The orange one said, "I'm sorry." The purple one said, "But I was right about the name. AITA?" The city of Velrith whispered with secrets, hidden under a shroud of perpetual twilight. It was a place where the clock hands moved in unpredictable patterns and the sky shimmered with hues of green and gold. The residents lived with the strange certainty that time did not own them but rather borrowed them, weaving them into its tangled narrative. Yet no one dared to disturb the clockmaker's tower at the heart of the city, for it was said that he was the master of all moments and the keeper of the last one. Adrin worked at the tower as an apprentice. His days were consumed with repairing errant gears and calibrating clocks that ticked with rhythms far older than he could comprehend. The clockmaker, a gaunt figure with hands stained perpetually black from some unnameable oil, rarely spoke except to issue cryptic instructions. "Don't touch the verdant dial," he warned once, though he refused to explain why. Or, "Never let the silver chronometer run out." Adrin obeyed without question, for fear of unraveling the delicate threads that held Velrith together. One night, while the city slumbered under its eerie, starless sky, Adrin heard the faint chime of an unfamiliar clock. It wasn't the usual harmonious hum of the tower's timekeepers. This was jagged, dissonant, like a scream frozen in metal. The sound drew him to a locked chamber he had never dared to enter. The door was carved with intricate glyphs that seemed to shimmer as he approached. His keyring jingled softly, and to his surprise, one of the keys, a tarnished silver one he had never used, fit perfectly. The room was unlike anything Adrin had seen. Instead of clocks, the walls were lined with translucent cases containing what appeared to be moments. Each one was alive within its glass prison. A woman laughing in a sunlit meadow, a child's first steps, a soldier's tear as he read a letter. They glowed softly, pulses of light matching the chime that had led him there. At the center of the room stood a single pedestal. Upon it rested an obsidian pocket watch, its surface smooth and featureless save for a single golden hand that pointed unwaveringly downward. Adrin knew he should leave, but the watch seemed to call to him, pulling at his very essence. He reached out, hesitating only for a breath, before his fingers closed around the cool metal. Instantly, the tower trembled. The cases lining the walls shattered, spilling their luminous contents into the air. The moments swirled around him, merging into a kaleidoscope of sights and sounds that threatened to overwhelm his senses. The clockmaker appeared at the door, his face pale but stern. "What have you done?" he hissed, striding forward with a speed that belied his frail frame. I didn't mean to," Adrin stammered, clutching the watch as though it were his lifeline. "You've touched the heart of the in-between," the clockmaker growled. "The watch you hold contains every second that never was. Every choice unmade, every breath stolen before it could be taken." Adrin stared at the swirling chaos around him, moments coalescing and then tearing apart in endless loops. "Why would you keep something like this?" he whispered. "It is not kept. It is contained," the clockmaker said grimly. "And now, you've unbound it." Before Adrin could reply, the golden hand on the watch began to move, ticking upward with agonizing slowness. The world around him seemed to bend, the walls of the tower curving like the interior of a great clockwork sphere. The clockmaker's voice softened, tinged with a note of sorrow. "You must fix it, Adrin, before it rewrites everything." "How?" Adrin's voice cracked, his fear barely contained. The clockmaker pointed to the swirling vortex of moments. "The watch must be wound with a moment of absolute clarity, one choice so certain, so pure, that it can anchor time itself. Find that moment, or the city will collapse into the in-between." Adrin nodded, though he had no idea where to begin. The watch grew heavier in his hand as he stepped into the maelstrom. The moments swirled around him, brushing against his skin like whispers. Each one offered a glimpse of a life he could have lived. The warmth of love he had yet to find, the thrill of triumph over challenges unmet, even the cold void of choices he regretted. But none of them felt true. As the tower groaned and the air filled with the hum of unraveling time, Adrin thought back to his own life, his own choices. His father's face came to him, worn with years of sacrifice, as he handed Adrin a small, broken clock on his 12th birthday. "Fix this," his father had said, "and you'll understand how to mend anything." Adrin had spent weeks repairing that clock, learning its intricacies, feeling the steady tick of its heart. That was the moment he had chosen his path, the moment that had brought him to the tower. He clutched that memory, felt its weight, its certainty. Raising the obsidian watch, he pressed the memory into its surface, pouring everything he was and everything he had ever been into that single choice. The watch shuddered, its golden hand spinning wildly before snapping back into place. The maelstrom stilled. The moments returned to their cases, the walls repairing themselves as though nothing had happened. Adrin fell to his knees, the watch slipping from his grasp. The clockmaker stood over him, a faint smile on his otherwise stern face. "You did it," he said quietly. "You found your anchor." Adrin looked up, the weight of what he had seen still heavy in his mind. "But at what cost?" The clockmaker knelt beside him, picking up the watch. Every choice has a cost, Adrin. The question is whether you're willing to pay it. Adrin never returned to the chamber again, but he swore he could feel the watch's weight in his dreams. And though the tower continued to tick, Velritha's twilight seemed just a shade darker, as if the city itself remembered the choice he had made, and the ones he hadn't. The air was heavy with the scent of lilacs, though none grew nearby. My sister, Leah, always burned those wax melts in her shop, saying it made customers linger. But today, no one lingered. The shop was empty except for the two of us, and the lilac sweetness felt cloying, like syrup left too long in the sun. She stood behind the counter, meticulously arranging tiny jars of her handmade skincare products. Exfoliants, serums, lotions infused with essential oils she swore had magical properties. Organic alchemy, her sign outside read, written in swirling, elegant font. Leah had poured her soul into this place. Every label bore her delicate handwriting, every product a testament to her belief in the healing power of nature. "Hey, can I talk to you about something?" I asked, my voice sounding small in the cavernous silence of the shop. She didn't look up. "If it's about Mom's birthday, I already ordered the cake." "It's not that." I fiddled with the edge of the counter. "It's about the new line." That got her attention. She set down a jar of rosehip cream and tilted her head, her smile just a little too tight. "What about it?" "I think there's a problem with it." Leah raised an eyebrow. "What kind of problem?" "The bergamot oil." I hesitated, then pushed forward. "You've been advertising it as safe for sensitive skin, but it's phototoxic. If someone puts it on and goes out in the sun, they'll be fine," she interrupted, her tone dismissive. "I've diluted it. I've done the research. I know you've diluted it, but it's still risky. There's so much evidence about." She held up a hand. "I don't need a lecture, Ellie. I know what I'm doing." Her words stung, but I pushed past the knot in my chest. "Leah, you know I love what you're doing here. It's amazing. You've built this business from nothing. But if someone gets hurt—" "No one's going to get hurt," she snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "I've been using bergamot oil for years. You've seen my skin. Do I look burned to you?" "It's not about you." My voice rose despite myself, the frustration spilling out before I could stop it. "You're not everyone. What if a customer doesn't know to wear sunscreen? What if they use it on their kid? It's not just your reputation on the line. It's your responsibility." Leah's face hardened. Her jaw set in that way that meant she wasn't listening anymore. "You don't understand," she said, her voice cold now. "This is my brand, my integrity. I'm not going to compromise because my little sister read an article online." "I didn't read an article." I shot back. "I studied this stuff in school, Leah. You know that. I'm not trying to tear you down. I'm trying to protect you." She let out a bitter laugh. "Protect me? That's rich. You think you're the expert because you got a degree in some fancy science field, but you've never run a business. You've never poured your heart into something and had to trust yourself to make it work." Her words hung in the air like a slap, and I realized my hands were trembling. "This isn't about trust," I said quietly. "It's about facts, and ignoring them doesn't make them go away." She didn't respond. She just turned back to her jars, her movements sharp and deliberate, like she was trying to scrub me out of her world with each twist of a lid. I stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of the lilac-scented air pressing down on me, before turning and walking out the door. For weeks, I avoided the shop. I told myself it was because I was busy, but really, I just couldn't face her icy glares. I'd left her a message after our fight, apologizing if I'd come off harsh, but she hadn't replied. And then, one evening, while scrolling through my phone, I saw it. A post from a local parenting group. A mother had used Leah's bergamot lotion on her toddler, who loved playing in the backyard. The child had developed painful blisters across her arms. The post didn't mention Leah's shop by name, but the description was unmistakable. The comments were filled with outrage and warnings to avoid those homemade products. I drove to the shop the next day, dreading what I'd find. Leah was there, sitting behind the counter, her eyes rimmed red. The lilac scent was gone, replaced by the sterile smell of nothing, like the air after a storm. "You saw it," she said without looking at me. I nodded. "Yeah, I refunded her, offered to pay the medical bills. But it's too late, isn't it? Her voice cracked. People talk. It's not too late, I said, though the words felt hollow. You can fix this. Be transparent. Learn from it. She laughed bitterly. You were right, Ellie. Happy now? No, I said, and it was the truest thing I'd ever said. I wanted to help you, not be right. She finally looked at me, her face a mixture of defiance and despair. Why didn't you push harder? I tried, I said, and for the first time, my voice cracked too, but I couldn't make you listen. The silence between us stretched, fragile as glass. I wasn't sure if it would shatter or hold, but I stayed. Because no matter what, she was still my sister. AITA? It started with the refrigerator. Specifically, the buzzing sound it made whenever the compressor kicked in. A low, grating hum that I swore was slowly driving me insane. Do you hear that? I asked Jules one morning as I poured my coffee. Jules, perched at the counter with their bowl of cereal, barely glanced up. Hear what? That sound, I said, gesturing toward the fridge like it was a problematic child. It's awful. It's like it's trying to summon demons every time it cools the milk. Jules shrugged. Sounds fine to me. That was Jules's approach to everything. Laid back, unbothered, perpetually cool. Meanwhile, I couldn't ignore the fact that the fridge was old, inefficient, and one blackout away from turning our groceries into compost. I decided to push the issue later that evening. I think it's time we replace the fridge, I said, casually scrolling through appliance websites. Jules looked up from their sketchpad. Sure, if you want. But if we're spending money, I'd rather put it towards something more fun, like a kayak. I blinked. A kayak? Jules's face lit up. Yeah, imagine us paddling down the river, exploring coves, getting some fresh air. It'd be amazing. We live in the suburbs, I pointed out. The nearest river is an hour away. So? Jules said, it'd be worth the drive. Plus, we could use it for years. And where exactly would we store this kayak? I asked. In the fridge? Jules laughed, but I wasn't joking. I could barely keep up with the clutter we already had in the garage. The thought of wedging a 10-foot plastic canoe in there made my eye twitch. That's when the tug-of-war began. I wanted a practical upgrade, a new refrigerator with better energy efficiency, and enough room to store leftovers without playing Tetris. Jules wanted an adventure. Do you know how much electricity our fridge wastes? I argued one night, pulling up statistics on my phone. It's like throwing money out the window. And do you know how many adventures we're missing out on? Jules countered, pulling up scenic photos of kayaks slicing through glassy water. The thing about Jules was that they had a way of making their ideas seem intoxicatingly appealing. I'd catch myself staring at their kayak photos, imagining the two of us out on the water, the sun warming our backs, the quiet ripple of paddles in the water. But then I'd snap back to reality and remember the fridge, the buzzing, the inefficiency, the imminent threat of spoiled groceries. One Saturday, we decided to compromise, or so I thought. Jules suggested we go to an outdoor store to just look at kayaks, and in exchange, I dragged them to the appliance store afterward. The outdoor store was a sensory overload. There were kayaks in every color imaginable, all sleek and inviting. Jules ran their hands over the hull of a bright yellow one, their eyes sparkling. Feel this, they said, pulling me over. I hesitated but gave in, running my fingers over the smooth surface. It's nice, I admitted. Jules grinned. See? You're already coming around. Then they launched into a pitch that would have made a used car salesman proud, extolling the virtues of getting out of the daily grind and making memories. I could almost see us on the water. Almost. But then it was my turn. At the appliance store, I pulled Jules toward the row of gleaming refrigerators. I opened the door of one with a fancy French design, complete with adjustable shelves and a built-in ice maker. Now this, I said, is a fridge. Spacious, efficient, quiet. Jules peered inside. Does it float? I groaned. It doesn't need to float. It just needs to keep our groceries cold. The salesperson raised an eyebrow, clearly enjoying the show. By the time we got home, we were no closer to a decision. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, haunted by the distant hum of the fridge. Jules, meanwhile, was scrolling through kayak reviews, oblivious. The next morning, I found a note taped to the fridge. In Jules's handwriting, it read, "Life isn't measured by the decibels of your appliances. Let's go kayaking." I couldn't help but laugh. It was so Jules, always chasing joy, even if it didn't make sense. But I wasn't ready to give in. So, I left my own note on the kayak brochure Jules had left on the counter. "Kayaks don't keep beer cold. Let's get the fridge." For days, the notes went back and forth. Jules left a sketch of us kayaking under a full moon. I retaliated with a chart showing how much money we'd save with an energy-efficient fridge. Jules taped up a photo of a couple kayaking at sunset, with the words "goals" scrawled across it. I printed out a refrigerator ad with the tagline, "For a better life." Then, one afternoon, I came home to find Jules waiting in the driveway. Strapped to the roof of their car was a second-hand kayak. "I got it on sale," they said, grinning like a kid who just discovered buried treasure. "It's used but in great condition." And I paid cash, so it didn't touch our fridge fund. I wanted to be mad. Really, I did. But the look on their face was pure, unfiltered excitement. "Fine," I said, "but we're getting the fridge next." "Deal," Jules said. A week later, we took the kayak out for its maiden voyage. Jules was right. The river was stunning. The sunlight dappled through the trees, the water cool and inviting. For a few hours, I forgot about the fridge, the buzzing, all of it. When we got home, I stood in the kitchen, staring at the humming appliance. Jules walked in, still dripping from the river, and gave me a hug. "Fridge next," they said softly. And for once, I believed them. But sometimes, when I hear the fridge buzzing at 3 a.m., I still wonder. AITA? They say you shouldn't meddle in other people's lives, but how can you not when the stakes are so high? That's what I told myself, anyway. It started with my neighbor, Mr. Lionel, a quiet, wiry man in his 70s with a permanent scowl etched onto his face. We didn't talk much beyond the occasional nod over the hedge, but I knew plenty about him. Everyone on the street did. Lionel lived alone in that peeling yellow house of his, surviving off a steady diet of black coffee and classical music that he blasted every Saturday morning. He was the kind of person who always seemed to be waiting for you to mess up so he could pounce on it. But the thing about Lionel that intrigued me most wasn't his prickliness or his odd habits. It was the letter. Every day, without fail, he walked to the end of his driveway at exactly 3:15 p.m. to check the mail. If you happened to glance out your window, you'd see him standing there, staring into the mailbox like he was hoping for a miracle. He'd reach inside, pull out a handful of junk flyers, sigh heavily, and trudge back to his house. It was the same routine, day after day, week after week. I couldn't help wondering what he was waiting for, or who. I finally asked him one morning when I saw him pruning his rose bushes. "Hey, Mr. Lionel," I started, leaning over the fence. "You seem pretty invested in that mailbox of yours. Got a secret admirer or something?" He paused mid-snip and gave me a look so sharp it could have cut through steel. "That's none of your business," he said, and that was the end of that conversation. But I couldn't let it go. Something about the way he said it, curt, but tinged with something else, like sadness, itched at me. So I did what any rational person would do. I decided to investigate. Not in a creepy way, of course. Just a light curiosity-fueled snoop. The next day, I casually positioned myself by my front window at 3:15. Sure enough, Lionel shuffled out to his mailbox, peered inside, and walked back empty-handed. I waited until he was safely back indoors before slipping out and sneaking a peek at the mailbox myself. Nothing but an advertisement for gutter cleaning. Disappointing. Over the next week, I expanded my operation. I started timing my walks so I'd pass by his house when the mailman arrived. I even chatted up the mailman once, dropping a subtle, "Oh, Mr. Lionel must be expecting something important with all the mail checking he does, huh?" But all he said was, "Lionel? He doesn't get much. Bills mostly." That's when I realized I'd need to take things up a notch. It wasn't enough to just observe the situation. If Lionel was waiting for something, or someone, I was going to make sure he got it. It started with an envelope. Plain white, No return address. Inside, I tucked a handwritten note, thinking of you. Simple, vague, friendly. I dropped it in his mailbox late one night, heart racing like I was committing a felony. The next afternoon, I watched from my window as Lionel pulled the letter out. He stared at it for a long time, his scowl softening into something almost wistful. Then he pocketed it and went inside. Success. Buoyed by that first victory, I got bolder. A week later, I sent another note. I hope you're well. Take care of yourself. Then another. The roses are blooming beautifully. Each time, Lionel's reaction was the same. Curious, thoughtful, maybe even touched. He started spending more time outside, pruning his roses, sweeping his porch, and once, to my astonishment, humming as he watered his plants. It was like watching a winter tree sprout its first green buds. I told myself I was doing the right thing. Lionel was lonely. These little notes were a kindness, a small spark of connection in an otherwise solitary life. Then came the day he knocked on my door. I opened it to find him standing there, clutching one of the notes in his hand. My stomach dropped. "Do you know anything about this?" he asked, holding up the letter like it was evidence in a court case. I hesitated. No? Why would I? He squinted at me, his face unreadable. "I don't know. You're always around, watching everything. I figured if anyone would know, it'd be you." I laughed nervously, trying to play it off. "Sorry, Mr. Lionel. Wish I could help, but it's not me." He stared at me for a moment longer, then nodded and walked away. I felt a pang of guilt, but it wasn't enough to stop me. The next letter I sent was different. I wrote about a memory, something I thought might resonate with him. "Sometimes I miss the sound of rain on the roof of my childhood home. Do you?" The day after he received it, Lionel didn't just linger by the mailbox. He started writing back. I discovered it accidentally. When I went to drop another letter in his box, I found an envelope already inside. My heart pounded as I pulled it out. It was addressed simply, "To my unknown friend." Inside was a single line, "Yes, I miss it too." I should have stopped there. I should have left him his dignity and his peace. But I didn't. The exchange continued. He wrote about his late wife, who had loved roses, and how he'd started gardening to honor her. He wrote about their Sunday mornings drinking coffee and listening to Bach. He wrote about missing her voice, her laugh, her terrible jokes. And I, pretending to be someone else, wrote back. I told him how beautiful his roses were, how lucky his wife must have been to have someone who loved her so deeply. I told him that grief doesn't mean forgetting, and that love lives on in the things we cherish. I thought I was helping him heal. But then Lionel's tone shifted. His letters grew more urgent. "Who are you?" he wrote. "Why do you understand me so well?" One day he wrote, "Would you like to meet? We could talk properly." That's when it hit me. This wasn't just a game anymore. Lionel wasn't corresponding with a friendly stranger. He was bearing his soul to a phantom I'd created. And now, he wanted the truth. But how could I give it to him? How could I explain that his mysterious friend was just his nosy neighbor, meddling in his grief for reasons I couldn't even fully justify? I never answered that letter. I stopped writing altogether. A week later, Lionel's mailbox stood empty. I didn't see him outside pruning his roses or sweeping his porch. The house grew quieter, and so did he. Part of me wanted to knock on his door and apologize, to explain myself, but I didn't. Instead, I watched from my window as the roses bloomed and withered, untouched. Now I wonder if I really helped him at all, or if I just took something from him. His privacy, his trust, his right to grieve in his own way. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was being kind. AITA? The night started with good intentions, don't they always? I'd agreed to meet my friend Sasha and her girlfriend, Bree, at a paint and sip class downtown. I didn't even want to go, honestly. I'd had a long day at work, but Sasha had guilted me into it with her usual, "You're so hard to pin down these days," speech. So there I was, apron on, brush in hand, trying to decide if my glass of Chardonnay or my smudged attempt at a sunset needed more attention. Everything was fine, pleasant, even, until Sasha brought up the trivia night incident. "Oh my God, Bree, you should have seen it," Sasha said, laughing as she dipped her brush into the orange paint. We're all trying to name the planets in order, and Nova here forgets Earth. Like, the one we're living on. I laughed along weakly, though it still stung. It wasn't even a funny story. It was a dumb brain fart from months ago. But Bree cackled like it was the best joke she'd heard all year. You forgot Earth? Bree said, still laughing as she smeared red across her canvas. Wow. And here I thought you were supposed to be the smart one. Now, you need to understand something about Bree. She's one of those people who says everything with a smile, so you can't tell if she's joking or subtly trying to dismantle your entire existence. I dealt with it before. The little jabs, the offhand comments, but tonight, I was already on edge. Well, I said, forcing a laugh. Maybe I just blanked because Sasha kept yelling random planets like Pluto and Krypton. Bree's smile didn't falter, but Sasha gave me a sharp look. I wasn't yelling. I was just helping. Sure, I said, swirling my brush in the water jar. Helping me fail spectacularly in front of everyone. You're so dramatic, Sasha said with a wave of her hand, but her tone was sharper than it needed to be. I decided to change the subject, asking Bree about her work. She launched into a detailed explanation of some tech project she was managing, and I nodded politely, sipping my wine. But then Sasha interrupted, and not in a way that felt supportive. Nova's the project queen, she said, nudging Bree. She'd probably tell you how to run your team if you asked. Bree smirked. Oh, I'm sure. But my projects actually, get finished. The air around us grew heavy, like someone had turned the heat up. I set my glass down a little too hard, the sound louder than I'd intended. Excuse me? I said, my voice tighter than I'd have liked. Relax, Bree said, still smiling. It was a joke. You can take a joke, right? Sasha laughed awkwardly. Nova, don't get all defensive. She's just teasing. No, it's fine, I said, forcing a smile as I turned to Bree. You're right. My projects do take longer. Probably because I don't have a team of interns to do all the work for me. Bree's smile thinned, but she didn't back down. Well, I'd take interns over trying to do everything myself and burning out. But hey, you do you. Oh, she does do her, Sasha said, laughing again. Sometimes a little too much. Like that time you decided to bake sourdough during lockdown and nearly burned your apartment down. It was a stupid anecdote, a harmless little memory, but the way Sasha delivered it, with that sly smirk, made it feel less nostalgic and more targeted. And maybe it was the wine. Or maybe it was months of quietly swallowing their digs, but I couldn't let it go. At least I don't spend all my free time trying to win at being quirky, I said. Seriously, Sasha, another neon yoga class? What's next? Underwater basket weaving. Sasha froze, brush hovering over her canvas. Wow. Okay, Nova. Way to be a buzzkill. You called me dramatic like 5 seconds ago. I shot back. What? Only you get to make jokes? You always do this, Sasha said, setting her brush down with a clatter. Anytime I'm excited about something, you find a way to crap on it. And you always find a way to make me feel like an idiot, I snapped. But sure, let's paint me as the bad guy. Guys, Bree interjected, raising her hands. This is like the most passive-aggressive fight I've ever seen. Can we not? Stay out of this, I said sharply, and Bree's eyes narrowed. Oh, I'm sorry, Bree said, her voice icy now. I forgot this is the Nova show, where only your feelings matter. I blinked at her, stunned. Where is this even coming from? It's always been like this, Bree continued, her voice growing louder. Sasha's constantly walking on eggshells around you because you can't handle the tiniest bit of criticism. That's not true, Sasha said, but it wasn't convincing. Her eyes darted between us like she was hoping for an escape hatch. I turned to Sasha, incredulous. Is that really how you feel? Sasha hesitated. I mean, you do get kind of sensitive sometimes, but it's not a big deal. Not a big deal? I said, my voice rising. Do you know how many times I've let you take little pot shots at me because I didn't want to ruin the vibe? Oh, so now I'm the villain? Sasha said, crossing her arms. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You twist everything to make yourself the victim. That's rich coming from someone who uses Bree as a backup singer for her digs, I said, glaring at Bree. You two are like a tag team of condescension. Maybe because you're an easy target, Bree said, her voice cutting through me like a blade. The three of us stood there in the middle of the studio, paintbrushes forgotten, surrounded by half-finished canvases and wide-eyed strangers who had clearly stopped pretending not to listen. Finally, Sasha grabbed her bag. I can't do this right now, she said, her voice trembling with anger. Come on, Bree. But Bree didn't move. Instead, she looked at Sasha, then at me, and shook her head. No, you two clearly have stuff to work out. I'm not playing referee. And with that, she walked out. Sasha hesitated for a moment, her lips pressed into a thin line, before following her. I stood there, stunned and humiliated, wondering how the hell it had come to this. Was it me? Was it them? Or was it all of us, tangled in a web of unspoken resentment and bad jokes that had finally snapped? So, AITA? The idea had come to me 6 months ago, during one of those long, lazy Sundays when the world feels suspended in time. I was flipping through an old photo album, the kind with faded Polaroids and doodles in the margins, when I landed on a picture of me and Elena as kids. We were standing by a creaky amusement park ride, holding matching stuffed animals we'd won at the ring toss. It was one of the happiest memories I had of us, and the look on her face, pure joy, unfiltered, sparked an idea. I was going to recreate that day, but not just any version of it. I'd been quietly working with the owner of a defunct amusement park just outside the city, restoring the ring toss booth and the rickety Ferris wheel for one last hurrah. I called in every favor, bribed a few friends with pizza and beer, and even scoured eBay to track down the exact stuffed animals we'd won that day. It was going to be a perfect mix of nostalgia and whimsy, a way to celebrate everything Elena and I had been through together. Our friendship deserved nothing less. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that Elena was plotting something too. Saturday arrived, and I was humming with excitement. The park was ready, every detail polished to a shine. I'd left Elena a note that morning with a pair of overalls. She always wore overalls to the fair as a kid, and directions to meet me at the abandoned park's entrance. The setup was flawless. All I had to do was show up and watch her face light up. But at noon, my phone buzzed with a text from her, "Be ready by 4. Wear sneakers. Trust me." Sneakers? Trust her? I stared at the screen, heart sinking. What could she possibly be planning? My stomach churned at the thought of competing surprises. What if she put just as much effort into her plans? What if one of us had to scrap everything? When I got to her apartment at 4 p.m., I felt like a walking contradiction, nervous, excited, guilty. Elena met me at the door with a devilish grin and a backpack slung over one shoulder. She was practically bouncing with energy. Ready? Yeah, I said, glancing at my watch. So, what exactly are we doing? She pressed a finger to her lips. No spoilers. By the time we reached the edge of town, I had pieced together enough clues to realize where we were headed, the woods. Not just any woods, though. These were our woods. The ones we'd explored as kids, building forts and creating elaborate fantasy worlds. A weird sense of déjà vu settled over me as Elena led me down a familiar trail, her backpack jingling with mysterious contents. "I've been working on this for months," she said, her voice full of pride. "You're going to lose your mind." We turned a corner, and I did a double take. There, in the middle of a clearing, stood a life-sized replica of one of our old forts. The roof was made of patchwork blankets, just like we used to do, and little twinkle lights ran along the edges. Inside, I could see crates of snacks, board games, and an honest-to-God battery-powered projector aimed at a bedsheet screen. It was like stepping into a memory brought vividly to life. "Oh my God," I breathed. "Right?" Elena said, glowing with triumph. "I've been sneaking out here after work, rebuilding it from scratch. I even got our old home videos to play on the projector." Cool, huh? Cool wasn't the word. It was incredible. But all I could think about was my amusement park waiting on the other side of town, now hopelessly overshadowed by this cozy wonderland. My stomach twisted with guilt. How could I tell her? "Elena, this is amazing." I started, struggling for the right words. But there's something you need to know. Her smile faltered. What? So, I told her. About the amusement park, the Ferris wheel, the hours spent tracking down every detail. As I spoke, her face shifted through a kaleidoscope of emotions. Shock, awe, and finally, understanding. When I finished, she let out a laugh that surprised me. We really are the worst, aren't we? I blinked. What? For once, could we just not try to outdo each other? I couldn't help but laugh, tension melting away. Fair point. We sat in the fort for a while, snacking on popcorn and flipping through old pictures Elena had stashed in her bag. It was comforting, sitting there with her, surrounded by the echoes of our childhood. But as the sun started to set, she nudged me with her elbow. So, what do we do about your amusement park? I hesitated. Honestly, it's kind of a mess. There's no way to do both. Elena frowned, then perked up. What if we brought everyone here? Made it a combo celebration? You mean pack an entire amusement park into a fort? I teased. Why not? We're good at ridiculous ideas. We spent the next hour rallying our friends, hauling snacks, and improvising carnival games with stuff from the fort. It wasn't what either of us had planned, but it was more fun than I could have imagined. We even set up a projector in the middle of the clearing, screening those old home videos for everyone to watch while the Ferris wheel creaked in the distance. At the end of the night, as we sat on the Ferris wheel, looking out over the glowing fort, Elena leaned her head against my shoulder. You know, she said, I think this might have turned out better than both our plans. I smiled, lacing my fingers with hers. Yeah, but seriously, AITA for hijacking your fort with a Ferris wheel? She snorted. Maybe, but it's kind of our thing, isn't it? They found the first note in the dust under the old piano in the library. Or, more accurately, I did. Charlie was too busy trying to unlock the liquor cabinet with a hairpin he'd stolen from our host's coat pocket. The note was folded into a perfect square, its edges sharp as if it had been waiting for years to be unfolded. Do not trust the fourth, it read in ink so dark it seemed to sink into the paper itself. I showed it to Charlie, who squinted at the words, his lips twisting into a grin. Well, that's cryptic. You think it's some kind of scavenger hunt? Not everything's a game, Charlie. But I pocketed the note anyway. The house was strange, even by the standards of strange houses. 5 floors, 22 rooms, all creaking with a language of their own. We'd come for the weekend under the guise of a reunion, college friends catching up after a decade apart. But the truth was, none of us knew why we'd been invited. The letters had arrived on the same day, in identical envelopes with no return address. They'd simply read, "You're expected." And here we were, 7 of us in a house that seemed more alive than it should be. There was Charlie, always the mischief maker. Lila, whose silence spoke louder than words. Greg, with his perpetual air of skepticism. Marcy, who never stopped smiling, even when it didn't make sense. Anna, the fixer of problems, and James, who never wanted to be here in the first place. And then there was me, the one who noticed things. The second note came after dinner, tucked inside the napkin Lila used to dab her lips. It was Greg who noticed her freeze mid-motion, her face pale as she read it. Without a word, she handed it to me. "Do not leave the house," it warned. "What kind of joke is this?" James muttered, his fork clattering onto his plate. But no one laughed. That night, we discovered the house didn't sleep. The doors that were locked at dusk stood ajar by midnight. The paintings on the walls seemed to shift if you stared at them too long. And then there was the clock, its hands spinning backward, faster with each passing hour. By the time the third note appeared, we were too deep into the game to question it. This one was pinned to the chandelier in the grand hall, its words as sharp as the shadows cast by the flickering light. "One of you doesn't belong." The tension thickened, each of us casting suspicious glances at the others. Marcy's smile faltered for the first time. Charlie's jokes became barbs. Anna tried to keep us calm, but even she couldn't deny the unease crawling through the group. We were being watched. It was Anna who found the fourth note, though she swore she hadn't touched it. It was in her room, sitting neatly on the pillow like a bedtime story. We all gathered to read it, our breath fogging in the cold, inexplicable draft. "The fourth is the liar. What the hell does that mean? Charlie snapped, pacing the room, but we all knew what it meant. There were 7 of us, and one was the 4th to arrive. Lila. Her face went pale as everyone turned to look at her. You think I'm the liar, she whispered, her voice shaking. No one's accusing anyone, Anna said quickly, but the room was electric with suspicion. Lila left the room first, slamming the door behind her. One by one, the others trickled away, until it was just me and the clocks ticking, steady and relentless. Only it wasn't ticking backward anymore. It had stopped completely. By morning, Lila was gone. Not just gone, but erased. Her room was empty, her bed untouched. Her name felt foreign on our tongues, like it had been scrubbed clean from the air itself. The others tried to rationalize it. She must have left, we told ourselves. But deep down, we all knew the house had taken her. The 5th note was waiting for us at breakfast, propped up against the syrup jug. Do not look in the mirrors. But of course, someone always does. It was Charlie, predictably. He didn't tell us at first, but I saw it in the way his eyes darted to the reflective surfaces around the room, the way his hands shook as he poured his coffee. By lunchtime, he was muttering to himself. By dinner, he was gone. The 6th note arrived as we searched for him, pinned to the underside of the grand piano's lid. It will only take 6. There were 5 of us left, and then 4, and then 3. It wasn't until I found the 7th note that I realized the truth. It wasn't the house that was alive. It was us, the 7 of us, who had brought it to life. Our secrets, our lies, our fears had seeped into its walls, feeding it, shaping it into a reflection of what we refused to see in ourselves. The 7th note wasn't written in ink. It was scratched into the glass of the mirror in the grand hall, its letters jagged and shimmering with an otherworldly light. You were the 4th all along. I stared at my reflection, at the face I barely recognized. And as the house sighed around me, its hunger growing, I realized there was no escaping the game. Not for any of us. The day my life turned upside down started with a package on my doorstep. It was a Tuesday, the kind of gray, drizzly morning that makes you wish you'd stayed in bed. I almost tripped over the box on my way out to work. There was no return address, just my name written in black ink with the kind of elegant flourish you see on wedding invitations. Against my better judgment, I carried it inside and set it on the counter. I had just enough time to grab my coffee before curiosity won. Inside the package was an ornate wooden box, the kind of thing you'd see in an antique store for a price that makes you whistle under your breath. The wood was polished to a mirror-like sheen, with intricate carvings of birds and ivy. Nestled inside the box was a letter, folded neatly, and beneath it, a small brass lever attached to the box's base. The letter was written in a flowing, old-fashioned hand. It said, "Dear recipient, you have been selected to receive a gift of great potential. The lever you see before you has the power to grant anything you desire. Wealth, fame, love, even time itself. It is all within your grasp. However, for every wish granted, something will be taken elsewhere. Choose wisely, for the consequences are yours alone to bear." The arbiter. I snorted. Someone was obviously playing an elaborate prank, but the craftsmanship of the box was too stunning to ignore. I set it on my coffee table and spent the rest of the day at work, unable to shake the image of that strange lever. What did it mean by "something will be taken"? Was it a metaphor? A scam? By evening, I couldn't resist any longer. I sat cross-legged in front of the box, staring at the lever like it might sprout fangs and bite me. My rent was overdue. My car was one pothole away from total collapse, and my fridge contained exactly half a carton of expired milk. What harm could one little wish do? "I wish for $10,000, I said aloud, feeling ridiculous. I pushed the lever forward. For a second, nothing happened. Then, with a faint hum, the lever clicked back into place. That was it? No magic sparks, no swirling vortex? I laughed at myself for believing anything would happen. But when I opened my laptop to check my bank account, my laughter died in my throat. There it was, $10,000, deposited from an account labeled simply, Provisionary Fund. I stared at the screen, heart pounding. Where had it come from? Who had sent it? But a part of me didn't care. The money was real. I paid my rent, scheduled a mechanic for my car, and ordered a week's worth of groceries for the first time in months. It felt like I'd finally caught a break. The next morning, I saw the news. A small nonprofit in another state had been robbed overnight, their entire emergency fund drained. My stomach churned. Coincidence? I told myself. There was no way the two events were connected, but the gnawing guilt stayed with me. Still, life got easier with the money. For a while, I almost forgot about the box. But then my sister called, crying because her medical insurance wouldn't cover an experimental treatment her doctor had recommended. It was like a hook lodged in my brain, tugging me back to the lever. If it worked once, why not again? I could help her. I wish for $50,000, I whispered. The lever moved like silk under my fingers, and moments later, the money appeared in my account. I wired it to my sister immediately, relief washing over me. For a day or two, I let myself believe I'd done the right thing. Then I read about the sudden closure of a children's hospital across the country. A funding crisis, they said. Critical patients being transferred to facilities that were already overburdened. I tried to convince myself it was unrelated, but deep down, I knew better. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Every time I made a wish, something terrible happened elsewhere. A new apartment for me meant a family losing their home in a mysterious fire. A dream vacation for my parents coincided with a natural disaster that displaced thousands. Each time, the box remained silent, the lever unmoved by my growing unease. The final straw came when I wished for more time. My dad's health had been deteriorating for years, and I wanted him to see my sister's wedding. I wish for my father to live another 5 years, I said, tears streaming down my face. The next morning, the news reported an overnight plane crash with no survivors. 142 people, gone in an instant. My father woke up stronger than he'd been in years, his color restored, his laughter loud and infectious. But the weight of those lives crushed me. I stopped using the box. I shoved it into the back of my closet, hoping to forget it existed. But forgetting wasn't possible. Every time I passed the closet door, I felt its presence, like it was waiting for me. My dreams were haunted by the things I'd taken without meaning to, by the faces of people I'd never met but had doomed just the same. Weeks turned into months. I tried to live normally, but the money I'd taken still carried a bitter taste. I donated to charities, helped strangers when I could, but it was never enough to erase the feeling that I'd tipped some cosmic scale too far. Then one day, the box reappeared. It was sitting on my coffee table when I came home from work, its lid slightly ajar. The letter was gone, but a new note had appeared inside. Your debt has come due. I don't know what the arbiter meant. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's everything. I haven't touched the box since, but it doesn't matter. I can feel the weight of it in every breath, in every step I take. Something is coming, and when it does, I don't think I'll survive it. AITA? I never thought I'd be the type to mess with tradition, especially when it came to family gatherings. But somehow, I found myself standing in the middle of my apartment, frantically scrolling through websites that promised the perfect weekend getaway. Our annual family reunion was a few days away, and after a conversation with my cousin Jenna, I'd found myself completely unenthused by the idea of a weekend at the same cabin we'd been renting for the past 10 years. The cabin had become legendary, of course, picturesque, nestled by a lake, and stocked with enough fishing poles, Esmores ingredients, and board games to last us until the next apocalypse. The place itself was beautiful, but that was the problem. It had become more of a ritual than an experience. And this year, I just wasn't feeling it. Jenna had mentioned she was considering a different location this year, something a bit more modern, a little more Instagrammable, as she put it. She didn't go into too much detail, but her vague promise of something chic, with a view, lingered in my mind. I mulled it over for a few hours, wondering why we always had to do the same thing every year. And that's when the idea hit me. What if I could be the one to surprise everyone? I mean, what if I could upgrade this year's reunion to something truly memorable? A mountain retreat? A vineyard? Or even a luxurious eco-lodge with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking cliffs and forests? Sure, it might cost a little more, but I had my credit card ready. Besides, it would be fun, right? Something fresh, a change of scenery, a break from the same old, same old. It would be perfect. By the time I hit book on a sleek, modern cabin about 3 hours away, I'd convinced myself this was a genius move. I even came up with a catchy excuse. I've been doing some thinking about how we can make the weekend more special. I tell everyone. A little twist, you know? The reservation was made. I sent a text to the family group chat, the one with 17 members ranging from my 80-year-old grandmother to my 19-year-old cousin who only texts in emojis. I typed out a carefully worded message. Hey everyone, this year's family reunion is going to be a little different. I found an amazing place for us to stay. Luxury, views, super modern, and there's even a spa. Trust me, it'll be unforgettable. Just pack light, and I'll send you the details soon. The reactions came in almost immediately. My mom, what do you mean by super modern? Last year's place was nice. My dad, are you sure about this? We've always gone to the lake. Jenna, oh, sounds fancy. I love it. I'm in. And then, as if I'd activated some family protocol, my grandmother's response arrived. Where's the fishing dock? My stomach dropped. It was like I'd forgotten about the most important part of the family gathering, my grandmother's fishing dock. Every year, without fail, she would take her spot on that wooden dock, her sun hat perched proudly, casting her line with the patience only a grandma could possess. It was the center of everything for her. I quickly typed out a reassuring response. Don't worry, we'll have plenty of outdoor activities, and the place has a lake. Just different, you know? You'll love it. I hit send and immediately regretted it. My phone buzzed with a new message from my mom. Are you sure this is a good idea? Grandma will be disappointed if there's no dock. I tried to calm myself. Everything was fine. It was just a change. A good change. The reunion would be more than a cabin by the lake. It would be an adventure. We'd adapt. We'd make new traditions. It would be perfect. When the weekend finally arrived, I was met with a combination of curiosity and apprehension. My family wasn't exactly the spontaneous, roll-with-the-punches type. Most of them had their bags packed and ready for the cabin retreat, fishing rods and all. But I was determined. As we drove, I carefully explained how everything would be different this year. Better. The others were mostly silent, unsure, while my grandmother mumbled something about the lack of a dock. We arrived at the new place just as the sun dipped behind the hills. I'll admit, I felt a rush of excitement as I pulled up to the sleek glass and wood cabin, nestled on a cliffside, with floor-to-ceiling windows that stretched toward the sky. The view was everything I'd hoped for and more. A 180-degree panorama of endless green, with the river below twisting like a snake. This is different, my dad muttered, still holding his fishing gear, clearly unsure of what to make of the modern architecture. Inside, the house was even more impressive. There was a gourmet kitchen, a sunken living room with minimalist furniture, and a fireplace that could double as an art installation. I could tell my mom was impressed despite herself, but there was no sign of a dock. My grandmother stood at the edge of the patio, craning her neck for a glimpse of water, and then turned to me with a stern expression. You said there was a lake, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It's just over the hill, I stammered, suddenly feeling less sure of myself. There's a small beach area, too. Her face fell. I came for the dock, you know, she said. The fishing. I don't know what to do without it. I tried to explain that this weekend was about something more than fishing, that it was an experience, something that would bring us all closer. But my words felt hollow, like they were bouncing off the walls of the pristine living room. That night, we sat down to dinner in the oversized dining area, and my family struggled to find common ground. My mom picked at her salad, my dad stared out at the view, and my grandmother barely touched her food. The conversations that usually flowed easily around the dinner table felt stiff and forced. I could feel the weight of everyone's disappointment pressing down on me. When dessert arrived, a delicate soufflé that was met with polite silence, I realized that what I thought was an exciting change felt more like an alienating disruption. My family didn't want a luxury experience. They wanted comfort, nostalgia, and familiarity. They wanted their fishing dock. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat alone on the patio, staring at the stars. The cabin was beautiful. The view was breathtaking. But as the night stretched on, I felt an emptiness inside. I had tried to bring something new, something exciting, but in the process, I had taken away the very things that made the reunion special. I realized too late that tradition wasn't something that could be improved by simply swapping one thing for another. It wasn't about luxury or design. It was about the memories we'd made year after year. The next morning, I called an emergency family meeting. "I'm sorry," I said, standing in the center of the room. "I thought I could surprise you with something better, but I see now that this wasn't it. I should have asked first." My grandmother, who had barely spoken the entire trip, looked at me for a long moment before nodding. "Well," she said, her eyes softening, "you're still my grandkid. Let's go find that dock." So, we packed up and drove back to the lake, where we found an old, rickety dock still standing, just as my grandmother had left it. We fished for hours, and for the first time in a long while, my family felt at peace. In the end, I learned something important. Sometimes, it's not about reinventing the wheel. Tradition is a place where we find each other, and sometimes, the best thing you can do is let it remain exactly what it is. AITA for trying to change the family reunion tradition? I wasn't trying to cause an interdepartmental war when I swapped out the cafeteria coffee machine. I just wanted people to stop complaining. Every morning, like clockwork, the office's most vocal contingent would cluster around the ancient beast of a coffee maker and gripe. "This sludge could strip paint," Claire from HR would say. "I think it's sentient," Javier from marketing would add. Even our usually chill IT guy, Mike, once threatened to yeet the thing into the sun. As the office manager, I took this as my personal failure. I was supposed to be the fixer, the one who made things run smoothly. And if my colleagues were pouring 3 creamers into their cups just to choke down the coffee, I wasn't doing my job. So, I decided to fix it. Not with some basic Keurig or off-the-shelf Mr. Coffee. No, I wanted to blow their minds. I researched obsessively, combing through forums and reviews until I found the one. The Tranquil Brew 5000. It was sleek, state-of-the-art, and promised to make every cup taste like a warm hug from a caffeinated angel. It cost a ridiculous amount, but I'd saved up enough office supply budget to cover it. I even splurged on the optional oat milk frother attachment. The day it arrived, I stayed late to set it up. I cleaned out the old coffee maker and ceremoniously placed the Tranquil Brew in its spot. I tested it. Heavenly. The next morning, I arrived early to post a little sign. "Welcome to the future of coffee. You're welcome. Your favorite office manager, Aaron." By 9 a.m., the machine was in full swing. People were curious at first, then delighted. Claire said it was life-changing. Javier declared it tasted like ambition and victory. Even Mike gave me a rare thumbs up. For the first time in months, the break room was buzzing with energy that wasn't fueled solely by caffeine withdrawal. Mission accomplished, right? Wrong. At 10:43 a.m., my phone buzzed with an email from Larry, the CFO. Subject line, "Urgent. Coffee incident." Apparently, the Tranquil Brew had sparked a chain reaction of chaos I could never have anticipated. Larry informed me that the accounting team, who were notoriously protective of their Nespresso pods, were incensed. "Why didn't we get consulted?" one of them had reportedly yelled. "We deserve premium options too." They felt the Tranquil Brew's arrival undermined their pod-based superiority. Meanwhile, Javier had been bragging to the marketing team that the coffee was their idea because of a casual comment he made months ago about upgrading the break room. Now the marketing team was embroiled in a passive-aggressive email thread with HR, who felt they deserved the credit for complaining the loudest. By noon, it had escalated into full-blown tribalism. Departments were staking claims on the coffee machine like pioneers in a caffeinated Wild West. People were arguing over who got to use it first in the morning, who was hogging the oat milk frother, and whether IT had hacked the machine to prioritize their brew requests, which, to be fair, sounded like something Mike might actually do. I tried to mediate. I called a meeting in the break room, hoping to calm everyone down. "It's just coffee," I said, gesturing to the Tranquil Brew like it was an innocent puppy caught in a custody battle. "It's here for all of us to enjoy." "No, it's here because marketing wanted to flex," snapped Denise from accounting. It's here because Aaron is clearly playing favorites, retorted Claire. Don't drag me into this, I protested, though I was very much already dragged. Javier chimed in. This is ridiculous. Can we all just admit that marketing is the creative engine of this company, and therefore, we deserve the best coffee? Oh, please, Denise shot back. You guys can't even decide on a font without a meltdown. I could feel my carefully curated professional reputation crumbling. The whole point of this was to bring people together, to make the office a little brighter. Now, it felt like I'd accidentally incited a civil war. By 3 p.m., things had reached an absurd peak. Someone created a Slack poll titled, "Who deserves the tranquil brew most?" The results were so heated that the CEO got involved. She called me into her office, her expression caught somewhere between amusement and exasperation. Aaron, she said, I appreciate your initiative, but you seem to have broken the office. I didn't mean to. I blurted. I just wanted people to be happy. She sighed and leaned back in her chair. People don't want happy, Aaron. They want something to complain about. If you fix one problem, they'll just find another. I walked back to my desk, deflated. The break room sounded eerily quiet now, like a truce had been called but tension still simmered. I avoided eye contact with everyone and started drafting a proposal to revert to the old coffee maker. Maybe I could frame it as returning to our roots. That evening, as I packed up to leave, Mike from IT wandered over. Hey, he said, holding a cup of coffee. Don't listen to them. This thing's awesome. Thanks, I muttered. Too bad it caused World War caffeine. Mike shrugged. People are gonna fight about something, no matter what. At least now they're doing it with better coffee. I wanted to laugh, but I mostly just felt exhausted. Did I screw up by trying to fix something no one really wanted fixed? Did I overstep by assuming I knew what people needed? Or are people just impossible to please? AITA? The world didn't end with fire or ice, as poets had once imagined. Instead, it ended quietly, slipping out of its own skin like a snake in the night. People woke up one morning, and the rules of reality had changed. Gravity wasn't consistent. Colors rebelled against logic, bending into hues no one had words for. Time fractured, breaking into strange pockets where days looped, stretched, or collapsed into seconds. No one knew why. No one knew how to fix it. Most just tried to survive. Arlen lived on the edge of what used to be called the city, though it had ceased being a city in any recognizable sense. Buildings floated above the ground like abandoned kites, tethered to the earth by fragile strands of reality. Streets twisted into impossible shapes, folding in on themselves or vanishing altogether. Arlen had once tried to map it, but the paper caught fire in his hands, and the pen bled ink that turned into screaming birds. He had stopped trying after that. Now he lived alone in what had once been a library, its bookshelves warped into spirals and its words jumbled into nonsense. Each morning, he climbed to the roof with a telescope salvaged from a time when the stars stayed still. He would peer through it, scanning the horizon for the shifts. The shifts were the only constant now, pockets of change that rippled across the landscape, rewriting the rules of existence. Sometimes they were small, a patch of ground where water flowed upward, a tree that whispered your name. Other times they were catastrophic, swallowing entire blocks and replacing them with alien jungles or oceans made of glass. Arlen had learned to stay ahead of them, though barely. He had no grand plan, no mission. He survived because he was too stubborn to stop. It was during one of these morning vigils that he saw her. She emerged from a shift at the edge of his vision, stepping out of the haze like a character from an old photograph. She wasn't like the others he had seen over the years, the wanderers who stumbled into the chaos only to vanish again. She moved with purpose, her steps steady even as the ground beneath her flickered between sand and stone. She carried a lantern that glowed with a light Arlen couldn't place, a light that didn't belong here. He watched as she made her way toward the library, her silhouette sharp against the shifting horizon. Arlen's first instinct was to hide, to retreat into the labyrinth of warped bookshelves and let her pass. People were dangerous now, unpredictable as the world itself. But something about her made him pause. Maybe it was the lantern. Maybe it was the way she seemed untouched by the madness around her, like she carried her own reality with her. Against his better judgment, he stayed. When she reached the library, she didn't knock. She didn't need to. The door opened for her, the wood groaning like it remembered her touch. Arlen stood at the top of the staircase, his telescope still in hand. She looked up at him, her eyes sharp and curious, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. "You've been watching me," she said finally, her voice steady but not unkind. Arlen hesitated, then nodded. "Hard not to. You stand out." She smiled faintly, though it didn't reach her eyes. "That's the idea." She stepped forward, the lantern swinging at her side. Its light flickered, casting strange shadows that seemed to move on their own. "You're Arlen, aren't you?" The question caught him off guard. He hadn't heard his name spoken aloud in years. "How do you know that?" "I've been looking for you," she said simply, as if that explained everything. Arlen narrowed his eyes. "Why?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she set the lantern down on a nearby table, its light spilling over the warped surface like liquid. "Do you remember what it was like before?" she asked, her tone almost wistful. Arlen frowned. It wasn't a question people asked anymore. The past felt irrelevant in a world that had so thoroughly abandoned it. "I remember enough," he said cautiously. "Why?" She met his gaze, and for the first time, he noticed the faint lines of exhaustion around her eyes. "Because we're going to fix it." He laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "Fix it? You can't fix this. It's broken beyond." "It's not broken," she interrupted, her voice firm. "It's unfinished." The words hung between them, heavy with implications he didn't fully understand. Arlen stared at her, searching for the cracks in her confidence, the hint of desperation that would prove she was just another fool chasing impossible dreams. But he found none. She believed what she was saying. Worse, a small, traitorous part of him wanted to believe it too. "How?" he asked finally. She reached into her coat and pulled out a small, intricately carved box. It was made of a dark, gleaming wood that seemed to shift under the lantern's light. With this, Arlen didn't move. He didn't need to. The box pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat, and he could feel its pull even from across the room. "What is it?" "It's the key," she said simply, "to everything." He stared at her, waiting for the punchline. When it didn't come, he shook his head. "You're insane." "Maybe," she admitted, her smile faint but unyielding. "But so is the world. And if we don't try, it stays this way forever." He wanted to argue, to tell her she was wasting her time, but the words caught in his throat. He thought of the shifts, the endless chaos, the hollow ache of survival without purpose. Was this really any better? "What do you need me for?" he asked, his voice quieter now. She picked up the lantern, its light flaring briefly. "The world remembers you," she said, "even if you don't remember it. That means something." Before he could respond, the floor beneath them trembled. A low hum filled the air, and Arlen's pulse quickened. He knew that sound. A shift was coming. The woman didn't flinch. She stepped closer, holding out the box. "Decide now, Arlen. Do you want to survive, or do you want to live?" He looked at her, then at the box, its surface gleaming with impossible possibilities. For the first time in years, he felt the faint stirrings of something he thought he had lost: hope. He reached for the box,